After reading other stories, I was reminded of a bizarre encounter that I had when I was in middle school. So this was nearly 13 years ago. Maybe this isn't as creepy as I remember it being as an adult, but given all the stories about kidnappings, I still feel very weird whenever I think of this. A 25-year-old female was walking home from my aunt's house after school, and she lives only about a block from my parents' house. It was starting to drizzle a little, so I remember finding it odd to see a man in a business suit and no coat or umbrella walking me seemingly to nowhere that would make sense. There aren't any modeling agencies near this street, so him being on foot at about 6 p.m. seemed off. He stopped me while I was walking on the sidewalk past him and abruptly asked me if I had ever considered modeling. At this time, I was about 12 and very goth, so no, I obviously was not modeling. Something about this whole thing sent off alarm bells for me because it didn't seem like any viable agent would ever approach any random young girl like this. What still strikes me about this was how he was carrying a portfolio of his models that he showed me to try and legitimize this proposal. But the pictures were either A, not of actual people but illustrations, watercolor paintings, architecture, or scenery, or B, photo shoots taken from fashion magazines like Vogue that he was passing as his own. He tried to get my information from me and I hurriedly declined and said that I would have to talk to my parents. I don't believe that he had a business card, and at the mention of my parents he seemed to back off. Once I walked away from him, I remember running the rest of the way home. I told my parents about this and they agreed that it seemed really off too. They did call the police to alert them of any suspicious activity just in case, but I never heard anything about it again. I love camping. It's the one time of the year where I can truly disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature. But one camping trip that I went on with my friends still haunts me to this day. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon and quickly set up our tents. We had planned to stay for 2 nights, so we had plenty of time to explore the nearby trails and to go fishing in the lake. After a quick dinner around the campfire, we decided to go for a night hike. We grabbed our flashlights and headed off into the woods. The trees were dense and the only sound that we could hear was the crunching of leaves under our feet. It was pitch black, but our flashlights lit the way. We walked for about an hour when we came across an old abandoned cabin. It was in terrible shape with broken windows and a caved-in roof. My friends wanted to explore it, but I was hesitant. Something about the cabin gave me an uneasy feeling. Despite my protest, they went in anyway. I stood outside, shining my flashlight in but not daring to step foot inside. They were only gone for a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When they finally came out, they said that they had found nothing interesting, and we continued on our hike. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we walked, we began to hear strange noises in the distance. It sounded like twigs snapping and leaves rustling. We all froze, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. That's when we heard a low growling sound. It was like nothing that I had heard before. Definitely not human, maybe an animal. We all started to run back to our campsite, but we quickly realized that we were being followed. The growling grew louder and louder and closer with every step that we took. Finally, we made it back to our tents and, being too far away from our vehicles, we decided to hunker down, start a fire, and zip ourselves in our tent for the night. We all tried to calm down, telling each other that it was probably just a wild animal and that we were safe where we were. But then we heard the sound of footsteps close by. They were slow and deliberate. It was like somebody was pacing back and forth. I whispered to my friends to stay quiet. In all reality, it probably didn't make much of a difference, but at the time it felt like a good idea. The footsteps stopped. We sat there in silence, too scared to even breathe. But then there was a scratching at our tent, slow and deliberate, like somebody trying to claw its way inside. That was it for us. We freaked out and started screaming and ran out of our tents and into the darkness of the night. I honestly think that our sudden outburst had scared off the intruder as it took off into the forest. Ourselves stumbled through the woods until we made it to a ranger station. We were all shaking and crying, trying to explain what had happened. The ranger listened to our story, but I could tell that he didn't believe us. He eventually took us back to our campsite, but we all decided to pack up and leave that night. None of us slept a wink. So, this is my second time writing in this sub. I'm a female in my early 20s, and I filed a police report and I've already told the story to those close to me. But I feel like venting about my piece of crap ex-housemate to you guys, and then it would make me feel a little bit better. Kareem is somewhat close to his name, so I'll use that. Now, I'm not very good at reading people, unlike my landlord. When I first met Kareem, he seemed polite enough. He was super tidy, filled the house with amazing smelling cooking, and best of all, he stayed out of my way. I'm kind of a loner and stayed holed up in my room with the company of my gerbils to quietly study and play Minecraft. We didn't cross paths often when the school year had started in September. He was the replacement for my housemate. It's a 3-bedroom apartment, and I had been living with another girl, Nellie, for a year already. She was pretty absent from the house, and as she was almost always at her boyfriend's place, and the third housemate had moved out. Early on, he was honest of his past that I should have taken as a warning, but took him as being earnest. I had asked him during the mini-interviewing process that Nellie and I were holding for potential tenants if he was 420 friendly. He was, but as it turned out, he was a little too friendly. A couple years ago, he had been arrested for illegal possession of weed and sent back to his home country of Turkey for a year before being allowed back into Canada to continue his studies. I didn't know how this kind of stuff works, to be honest, but that's what he told us. I try not to be a judgmental person, since he made it seem like it was a thing of the past. I learned this was not the case. One of the first things I noticed in September was that he smoked almost constantly. Not to the point of missing classes, but the whole house would stink up multiple times a week in the evening. Normally, I wouldn't mind a little smoke, but any stoner will tell you that each strain is different, and for whatever reason, his weed had caused really severe panic attacks for me. Around late October, I got sick of his stuff and told him to figure out how to contain it to his room, and he said that his joints are hard to contain, and that he really needed a bong. So I let him borrow mine. About 2 weeks later, in November, Kareem said that he had broken the downstem, but that he would replace it. Within a few days, he did replace it, but it was the wrong size. Maybe it was a bit picky of me, but I told him to buy the right size, and he refused, said that it was too expensive. I mean, I don't know, it's my property and he broke it. He should fix it appropriately, right? Let me know if that request was out of line. What I know was not out of line, however, was what I did after what happened in mid-February. Around January, my landlord said we should start looking for new housemates, which was reasonable enough. Not to Kareem, though. My landlord had always been slower responding to messages due to the nature of her job, but he absolutely hated her guts for it. Called her awful things and every name under the sun behind her back, which made me feel weird considering I had been her tenant for 3 years now and we were on good terms. Before I move on to the next part, I would like to quickly add that at one point during the housemate hunting process, he asked me if I would be willing to move out so that his friends could move in, and that it would be super amazing if I did. Obviously, I said no. My landlord later confirmed that he had asked her if he could sign the lease behind my back. As I mentioned earlier, We had forged a good rapport over the last 2 years, so it was a firm no. Kareem had got excessively antagonistic about my landlord's deadline when she wanted us to sign the lease. Started at looking at the law, saying he legally didn't need to give her notice until X date, which wasn't true. He told me to quietly look for housemates and tell the landlord at the last possible date, which made me super uncomfortable since it was around midterms, and was secretly grateful she was pushing for the deadline so strongly. I just wanted it over with. It was shortly before I signed the lease with my new housemates that he showed how truly two-faced he was. I dug through our Facebook messages. The gist of the conversation was this. Kareem, can I use your laundry after I move out? I don't have laundry on site. Sorry, no, that's kind of weird. No, it's not, we'll pay you. We? Yeah, me and my housemates. Note, I never met these housemates before and still have no idea who they are. At this point, I started getting extremely weirded out. I said no a few times but caved and started saying stuff like, I'll think about it, to appease him. Though I had zero intent of letting him use my stuff. It seemed like the best way to get him off my back since for almost a week he had continuously pressured me and to try to get me to say yes. Things hit the first of two crescendos when, the day before, me and the 2 new tenants I chose, super awesome dudes by the way, were supposed to sign the new lease. Back to Facebook, and again, an approximation of our conversation. If you don't promise to let me use your laundry next year, I'm going to make a scene in front of your housemates. A scene. When they come sign the lease with her, I'm going to tell them how awful our landlord is, that she doesn't care about us and is terrible at replying to our messages. If you let me use your laundry, I'll wait until they leave to tell her to her face. In other words, he was going to make my new housemates question my judgment and make them think that I was a bad person or something. Why else would he go off in front of them and my landlord and tell me she was a horrible and nasty person? He later claimed that these messages were a joke to which I messaged back asking where the punchline was, because I didn't see it. I felt like a badass saying that, not gonna lie. Especially since he never got around to explaining the supposed joke. At this point, I had a bit of a breakdown. I called my landlord that night when Kareem had left the house for a few hours, letting her know exactly what had happened, and what he was planning to do the next day, even sending our screenshots of our Facebook messages, and telling her that I couldn't let her and my new housemates come over in good conscience. Call me a snitch, I don't care. This guy does martial arts 3 times a week and, despite being shorter than me, could definitely send me through drywall if he felt like it. I felt threatened and didn't want to know what he would do if he found out that I told her, and was the reason signing the lease was rescheduled to a different time and location. She believed me, especially when she read all the text messages. Full context, nothing conveniently cropped. She even saw the parts where I was playing along and calling her names too. That's when she told me that she had seen straight through his act while he was signing the lease. Apparently, he spent half an hour reading and rereading our lease, which is abnormal, asking weird questions and being rude to her. After years of being a landlord, she could clearly see that he's the type of overly macho guy that likes to control women, but gave me the benefit of the doubt. I'm inclined to agree, especially looking in hindsight at how he's treated the women, me, the landlord, and Nellie, versus men, Nellie's boyfriend and my male friends, in our lives. So, I signed the lease with my new housemates the next day at a coffee shop, telling Kareem that it was out of the blue that we were signing elsewhere, and that I had no idea why we had changed plans, and I thought that I had gotten away with telling on him. Until my landlord sent him a letter from her lawyer that we very clearly stated that he would not be allowed to demand the use of the laundry again, and that if he came back to the house after moving out, it would be considered trespassing. At first, I thought it was an overreaction on her part, but looking back on those messages, I can see why she made that decision. He angrily knocked on my door and shoved the letter in my hands when he got in that day, aggressively and quite frankly, melodramatically saying, "You betrayed me." I kid you not, those were his exact words. I think he lost his grip of me since he could no longer pressure me now that the secret was out, which frustrated him. Things then settled down temporarily. He would retaliate in small ways, going out of his way not to sort the recycling in proper bins, not cleaning out the shower drain, putting plastic and metal in the compost bin, and smoking weed excessively. They were small, but they irritated me. It was the day after he moved out that we reached our second and final crescendo, which led to the police report from the initial paragraph. After months of stuffing a shirt under the crack of my door to keep the weed stink out, and generally being freaked out to the point of carrying a small kitchen knife in my pocket whenever I left my room after the laundry incident, you can bet your butt I was counting down those last days gleefully. He said that he left a few things behind from the kitchen. He came along with a friend and we sorted out whose Tupperware was whose. On his way out, he spotted my mop and bucket. He claimed that it was his and that he wanted it back. I had had this mop and bucket for 2 years. Why the heck was he claiming that it was his? I said no and he started roaming around the house, saying that he wanted his mop and bucket, and that if this was mine, his must be elsewhere, which made me uncomfortable as hell. I diffused the situation by saying I wanted to use it, and I would give it back later. I was planning on keeping it. I am under zero obligation to let him back in. Remember the letter that said him coming back in the house after he moves out is trespassing, and he instantly snapped out of it. Later that day, he even said that I could keep it. Why he changed his mind is beyond me. The next day, Kareem said he had left 2 more items behind. I was irritated at this point. I just wanted to be left alone. I said I would leave it outside. I admit I definitely shouldn't have done what I did next. I was annoyed and I cringe when I read my own messages, but his reaction was completely out of proportion. Kareem said, "Yeah, I'll stop by in a few hours. I just got out of the shower. I'm busy, can't you come by now? Just throw on some shoes and shorts and a t-shirt, nobody's outside." By the way, at this point, my town had been on lockdown for 2 months. Since it's a university town and I live in an area almost exclusively populated by students, nearly everyone was gone and it had been a ghost town for weeks. I should also note that he had not been taking good social distancing measures whenever he was over, and had zero problem getting him close even though he had recently been to a much bigger city with a bad outbreak. Just thought that I would point that out. Fine, then give me my mop and bucket. You said that I could have it. Give it back. No. I put the 2 items, a tray and a mug, on the porch. A few minutes later, I heard a polite knock. I knew it was him and I ignored it. A few seconds later, a ring on the doorbell. Another ring, a louder knock. He kept ringing the doorbell over and over. Exasperated, I opened it and he stood there smiling. "Give me my mop and bucket." No. I quickly shut the door. Truth be told, I was worried he would try to stick his foot in the door and try to stop me from closing it, but he didn't move. He started knocking again, and ringing the doorbell repeatedly. At first, it was with some time in between, a few seconds, but it grew in frequency and volume. It went from firm knocking to louder, angry knocking. It felt like I was running a marathon, my heart was beating so fast. Since he started up straight up pounding on the door so hard that I could see it move, literally screaming, "Give me my stuff," over and over at the top of his lungs. After about 2 or 3 minutes of him being aggressive and doing this, I can assure you it felt like hours. He stopped and I heard this weird, metallic scraping sound, like metal on concrete, accompanied by a grunt, followed by a loud metallic clang, and then silence. I waited for a while. I stealthily looked through the windows and didn't see him. I opened the door and to my surprise, saw that he had pulled my mailbox off the wall and thrown it onto the path leading to the sidewalk. I kicked myself for not filming the incident, but took my sweet time taking the perfect picture to show that he had made some kind of attempt to destroy the property. I mean, not much that I can do. It felt like the right thing to do, nonetheless, and I still have it. I ended up putting the mop and bucket outside and telling Kareem to come get it, and I just wanted to leave me alone. I even took out the battery of our door code since a part of me is paranoid it would try to guess it and break in. He came by and took it, and I watched him leave from the window. He hasn't contacted me since. I saw him on the street the other day and he gave me a warm smile as if we were friends, but I looked away and crossed to the other side to avoid him. I filed a police report of the incident the same day, as advised by my landlord. She told me during our phone call that he had a documented history of aggression, and I'm not shocked. I'm surprised she gave me the benefit of the doubt though, and let him sign the lease in the first place. I guess this was a learning experience for us all. When I asked her of her honest opinion of my new housemates, she said they were trustworthy. Plus, it turns out that the guys and I have a mutual buddy, so I'm not scared of them. I told them about the whole incident and they blocked him on Facebook. They were super supportive and I'm glad that I filed a report. They know who he is and they won't let him inside. The thing that freaks me out a little is that he moved down the street. I can see his new unit from my window. I can't really say let's not meet again since we live so close and we'll inevitably cross paths on the street in the future. But I can confidently and without hesitation say, Kareem, get effed.